Dad, I'm gay and I have a boyfriend. I can't marry a girl. I don't like girls, he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. The room became so quiet that Idris could hear his own heartbeat echoing against the walls. The scent of his mother's cooking still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of his father's favorite aftershave. His father's face changed. At first he looked confused, his brow furrowing deeply, and then his expression turned angry, his jaw tightening. "What are you saying, Idris?" his father asked loudly, his voice bouncing off the living room walls. "What nonsense is this?" "It's not nonsense, is this? It's not nonsense, Baba," Idris said, his voice trembling, his fingers gripping the edge of his phone tightly. "This is the truth. I've been hiding it because I was scared of how you would feel, but this is who I am. I can't pretend anymore." Idris was a young boy living in a small, busy town in Nigeria, where the streets were always filled with vendors selling fresh fruits and roasted peanuts, and children running barefoot through dusty alleys. He was just 17 years old, but he already felt the heavy weight of his parents' dreams on his small shoulders. His father, Mr. Dyke, and his mother, Mrs. Lamy, worked very hard every day, waking up before the sun rose and coming home long after it had set. They didn't have much, but they hoped that Idris would grow up to become successful and make their lives better. "Idris, you're so smart," his mother would say, looking at him with hope in her eyes as she stirred a pot of soup over their small charcoal stove. "One day you will be better than all those kids we see on social media." Idris always nodded when they talked about his bright future, but deep inside, he wasn't sure if he wanted the same things they did. Sometimes he wished they would ask him what he wanted, but they never did. They only spoke of his future as though it were already written. One day, Mr. Dyke and Mrs. Lamy made a big decision. They sold some of their belongings, things they cared about, like Mr. Dyke's old radio and his mother's woven baskets, to send Idris to a famous boarding school. They believed the school would give him the best chance to succeed, and in their small, dimly lit living room, they handed him a new smartphone. "We're doing this for you, Idris," his father said as he placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "You have to work hard and make us proud. No excuses." Idris nodded again. "Yes, Baba," he said quietly, but his heart felt heavy, as though he were carrying a burden far too big for his age. When he arrived at the school, Idris felt very small and out of place. The other boys wore fancy clothes and walked like they were kings, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floors of the dormitory. They spoke loudly and laughed freely, while Idris stood in the corner, unsure of what to do, his uniform slightly too big for his small frame. One day, a boy from the school smiled at him. "Hey, new boy, what's your name?" "Idris," he said shyly, his voice barely audible over the chatter of the dining hall. "Stick with us, Idris," the boy said, flashing a grin. "We'll show you how to have fun." For the first time in weeks, Idris felt like someone cared. He started following the group of boys around, laughing at their jokes and doing whatever they told him to do, even when it made his stomach twist uncomfortably. A few weeks later, one of the boys said, "We're going to a movie concert tonight. You should come." Idris didn't know what a movie concert was, but it sounded like fun. He smiled and said, "Okay," feeling excited to go out with his new friends. When they arrived, Idris immediately felt something was off. The place was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne, and strange music played softly in the background. Men were standing in small groups, some of them holding hands or standing so close their faces nearly touched. Idris noticed one man leaning in to kiss another, his hand resting lightly on the other's waist. Idris's confusion grew when one of the boys he came with put an arm around another man and laughed softly, their faces inches apart. Another boy from the group sat on a man's lap, playing with his shirt collar while whispering something that made the man smile. The air felt heavy, and Idris's stomach churned. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but it felt strange and deeply uncomfortable to him. He didn't like the way the men were looking at each other, or how freely they touched. I need to leave, Idris whispered to himself, his chest tightening with fear and confusion. Without saying a word to anyone, he turned and ran out of the building, his heart pounding hard as he put as much distance as possible between himself and the place. When Idris went home for the holidays, he wanted to tell his parents about what had happened. But every time he tried to talk, his father would say, "Idris, excuses won't get you anywhere. You just have to try harder." His mother added, "We've given up so much for you, Idris. Don't waste this chance." Idris felt like no one wanted to hear how he really felt, so he stopped talking about his feelings and started spending more time with the boys at school, even though he knew they weren't good for him. By the time Idris turned 26, he was not the same happy boy he used to be. On the outside, he smiled and acted like everything was okay, but inside, he felt sad, lonely, and scared. He was hiding a big secret, and it made him feel like he was carrying a heavy load every day. One quiet evening after dinner, Idris sat with his parents in the living room. The TV was on, but no one was watching it. The smell of burning kerosene from their lantern filled the room. Idris sat quietly, looking at his phone, his fingers tapping anxiously against the screen, while his father, Mr. Dyke, put down his newspaper and looked at him. "Idris," his father said, breaking the silence. The room was dimly lit, the old ceiling fan whirring softly above them. "Why don't you ever talk about girls? You're old enough now. Are you seeing anyone?" Idris's heart started beating very fast. He had always known this day would come, but he wasn't ready for it. He swallowed hard and looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the loose thread on his sleeve. "Baba," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." His father raised an eyebrow, shifting slightly in his worn-out armchair. "What is it?" he asked. Idris took a deep breath. His hands were shaking, his palms slick with sweat. "I don't like girls," he said slowly. I'm gay." The room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall and the faint sound of distant traffic from outside. Idris stood in front of his parents, his face filled with frustration and sadness. His father, Mr. Dyke, paced back and forth while his mother, Mrs. Lammy, sat on the couch, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders trembling slightly. "Idris," his father began, his voice sharp and disappointed, "this is not how we raised you. How could you turn out like this? A man is supposed to marry a woman and build a family. This is unacceptable." Idris clenched his fist and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Baba, stop saying this is not how you raised me. Do you even remember how you pushed me into this?" Mr. Dyke stopped pacing and stared at his son. "What are you talking about? How did we push you into this?" Idris pointed at his father, his voice rising. "Do you remember when I started hanging out with that peer group in school? The ones who were always talking about being free to be yourself. You encouraged me to join them. You said they were good kids, that I could learn discipline and focus from them. Do you remember that? His mother looked up, confused, her lips slightly parted. Idris, are you saying your friends made you like this? Yes, Mama, Idris said, his tone sharp but pained. But it wasn't just them. It was you and Baba who told me to be like them. You always said, Idris, look at how respectful they are. Look at how they dress. Why can't you be like them? You wanted me to copy them so much that I started spending all my time with them. And that's when I realized who I am. Mr. Dyke's face tightened, his voice defensive. We didn't tell you to become this. We wanted you to learn good behavior, not. Not what, Baba? Idris interrupted, his eyes blazing. Not to find out who I really am. Not to be honest with myself. You encouraged me to spend time with them. And when I started feeling different, I tried to talk to you. But you shut me down. Every time I came to you, you brushed me off. Don't talk nonsense, Idris, you'd say. Just focus on your studies. Now you're blaming me. Now you're blaming me. Now you're calling me a disappointment? How is that fair? His mother's hands shook as she held her tissue. Idris, we didn't know. We thought we were helping you. We didn't mean for this to happen. Well, it did, Idris said, his voice firm but calmer. And I don't regret it. I love who I am. I'm not ashamed anymore. And I won't let you make me feel like I'm broken. Mr. Dyke slammed his hand on the table, making the old wooden frame shake slightly. You don't regret it, Idris. How can you stand there and say that? Don't you know what this means for our family? People will talk. They'll shame us. Idris laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Oh, so this is about what people will say, not about me, your son, and how I feel. You care more about strangers than about my happiness. Don't twist my words. Idris, his father snapped, his hands tightening into fists. We're worried about you. We want the best for you. This is not the best. Idris took a step closer, his voice softer but no less determined. Baba, you don't know what's best for me. You think marrying a girl is the answer. Let me tell you something. Girls aren't loyal. I've seen it. I've watched friends get hurt by women who lied, cheated, and left them broken. I've seen marriages fall apart because people were forced into roles they didn't want. That's not the life I want. His mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her breath hitching slightly. But Idris, not all girls are like that. You can find a good woman, someone who will love you. I found love, Mama, Idris said, his voice steady, unwavering. But it's not in the way you imagined. And that's okay. I'm happy with who I am. For the first time in my life, I'm not pretending to be someone else. Isn't that what you've always wanted for me? To be happy? Mr. Dyke looked away, his hands on his hips, his face conflicted, his jaw working as if he were trying to form words but couldn't find the right ones. Idris stepped back, his voice growing quieter, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I just want you to see me for who I am, not for who you want me to be. I tried to be the perfect son, but it wasn't enough. Now I'm being myself, and it's still not enough. What do you want from me? The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy with anger. It was filled with thought. His parents exchanged glances, Unsure of what to say, Idris took one last deep breath and said, "I love you both. I always have. But I can't keep fighting for your approval. I've learned to love myself, and that's what matters most." With that, Idris walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving his parents to sit in the silence of their thoughts. This story teaches us an important lesson. True happiness comes from embracing who we are, not from living up to the expectations of others. Idris's journey reminds us that self-acceptance is key and that love and understanding should come before judgment. We should support those around us and listen to them rather than forcing them into roles that don't fit. Thank you for watching my channel. Stay tuned for more powerful and thought-provoking stories. Don't forget to check out other exciting videos in the channel. As she returned home that evening, her stepmother called her all sorts of degrading names, saying that her evil hair was the root cause of all the terrible things that had been happening. She called her dreadlocks evil snakes hanging on her head, saying that if she fails to cut her hair, evil will continue to be unleashed. Once upon a time, in the heart of a very small village, surrounded by vast green fields and dense forests, lived a girl named Zara. Zara was unlike any other girl in the village. Her dreadlocks set her apart from her peers, who made fun of her because of her hair. They would tug at her hair while she walked on the street, and some even went as far as believing that she was possessed. The dusty streets of the village often echoed with their jeers, as Zara tried to ignore them. Zara's mother spared no opportunity to tell her how special she was, but this was so hard for her to believe, as every other person in the village detested her because of her hair. One day, Zara was fetching some water from the village stream when a boy named Ayo arrived at the stream with his friends. Ayo was the son of a very wealthy man in the village. He was well known and respected, often seen riding on a majestic white horse that was the pride of his family. He approached Zara and requested that she give him some water from her clay pot. His friends laughed as they waited to see Zara's reaction. Without saying any word, Zara dipped a small calabash into her clay pot and offered it to Ayo, who was shocked at her calm demeanor. As Ayo drank from the calabash, he found himself staring at Zara's dreadlocks, and his friends wondered what had come over him. He handed the calabash back to her as he thanked her for being so kind. All his friends opened their mouths in shock, as this was so unusual of Ayo, who was always arrogant and rude. They laughed at him as they teased him for drinking from a cursed girl's water pot, but Ayo paid no mind to them, as he could not shake off the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. As the days passed, Zara's encounter with Ayo became the subject of gossip in the village, especially as Ayo became terribly ill. Many believed that Ayo had been bewitched by the girl with the strange hair, while others speculated that the curse which followed Zara had transferred into Ayo, making him sick. His rich father did everything within his power to restore his son's health, but as the days went by, Ayo's sickness grew worse. Zara felt so terrible, as everyone believed that she was the cause of his sickness. The accusing eyes pierced through her skin as she walked the streets of the village, and Zara, in that moment, knew that she had to do something about all that was happening. As she returned home that evening, her stepmother called her all sorts of degrading names, saying that her evil hair was the root cause of all the terrible things that had been happening. She called her dreadlocks evil snakes hanging on her head, saying that if she fails to cut her hair, evil will continue to be unleashed. Zara felt so terrible to hear this as she retreated into her hut and began to cry. She took a sharp blade and was about to cut her hair when her mother entered the hut and stopped her. Zara wept uncontrollably as she asked her mother if she was cursed, and her mother told her that her hair was a blessing and that she should not listen to all that the people were saying because she was perfect with her dreadlocks. Night came and Zara could not sleep. She was so worried about the rich man's son, Ayo, as she wondered if she had a hand in his sickness. Zara began to whistle her favorite song, hoping to fall asleep, when she heard a strange sound outside her door. It was late in the night, and Zara was extremely afraid. She decided to check what it was, and was confronted by the sight of a frail old woman sitting under the tree close to her hut. "You called for me," the old woman said, as goosebumps filled Zara's entire body. "What worries you, precious one?" the old woman asked, and stammering out of fear, Zara told the old woman all that had been happening. The old woman listened intently as she spoke. She told Zara that people fear what they cannot understand, and that her dreadlocks were not a curse, but a gift to the entire village. Zara looked at the old woman in confusion as she asked what she meant by a gift. But before she could finish asking the question, the old woman disappeared into the night. Zara returned to her hut, unable to sleep, as she thought about all the old woman had said. She woke up the next morning to a loud noise in front of her hut and realized that a group of villagers had come to take her away. They all believed that Zara was cursed and had to be banished from their village. Zara's mother did all she could to stop them from taking her daughter away, but all her efforts proved futile. So she decided to leave the village with her daughter. Zara and her mother had nowhere to go, so they wandered from one village to the other. The people had never seen anyone with such hair before, and this terrified them, as they wondered if Zara's hair was made of snakes. No one let them settle in their village, so for days, Zara and her mother slept in the dark forest as the mosquitoes feasted on their delicate bodies. However, despite the fear and rejection that they faced, Zara's mother never for once faltered in her belief that her daughter's hair was a blessing. She reminded Zara of her ancestry of warriors and healers who had carried the same dreadlocks through the ages, "Your hair is a symbol of strength," her mother said, "and one day it will show its true power to all." Zara clung to her mother's words, but couldn't take her mind off the possibility that the villagers might have been right. So, Zara, while her mother slept one night, snuck out of the forest away from her sleeping mother. It was not an easy decision for Zara, who could not stand the sight of her mother suffering for her sake. She hoped that her absence would force her mother to return to their village, back to her comfort, and she could not stand by and watch her suffer. Zara wandered from one village to the other, hoping to find someone who would accept her for who she was. She faced so many rejections on the way, as people called her a witch and a curse. But Zara did not give up as she kept on going. One night, as Zara lay to sleep in the forest, she saw a strange figure in the distance. It was the figure of a man who moved extremely fast. Zara was terrified as she wondered how a man could move so fast. Filled with terror, Zara tried to run away when the strange-looking man grabbed her by her hair. Zara noticed a bright glow that emanated from her dreadlocks. Zara watched as the strange-looking man transformed into a very handsome man. She was so amazed as she could not believe what had just happened. The young man thanked Zara for saving him and asked what she was doing alone in the forest. Zara explained all she had passed through in the hands of her people, who believed that she was cursed because of her hair. The young man urged Zara to follow him, as he could not watch her live in the forest. They walked into the village, and Zara was met with curious stares, not of fear but of wonder. The young man, who introduced himself as Daniel, was the prince of the village. He explained that an evil witch had cast a spell on him, turning him into a strange being doomed to roam the forest. Only the touch of one with a pure and misunderstood heart could break the curse. Zara, with her unique dreadlocks, was the one destined to break his curse. Daniel then led her to his father, the king, who was a wise and kind man. He listened to Zara's story, his heart moved by the injustice she had endured. "Your hair is a gift, young Zara, and it has broken a curse that the most powerful healers could not. We welcome you as our own." Zara, for once in her life, for once in her life, for once in her life, felt accepted by a people who appreciated the power of her locks. Her mother, who never stopped looking for her, learned of her whereabouts and arrived at the palace to see her daughter. Zara was so happy to see her mother, who hugged her tightly. Meanwhile, back in Zara's birth village, Ayo recovered, and the village healer received a revelation that Zara was the only one with the power to heal his sickness. The healer informed Ayo's father of the revelation, and he set out in search of Zara. After a few days, they arrived at Zara's kingdom and were shocked to find Zara living in the palace of the king. The rich man pleaded with Zara to save his son's life, and Zara, filled with compassion, agreed to heal his son, Ayo. When they arrived at their village, Zara went straight to Ayo's side. She let down her dreadlocks and placed them on Ayo's chest. Immediately the locks glowed, and the illness vanished as Ayo regained his health. The entire village rejoiced as the people called out Zara's name in joy. But just as Zara was about to leave Ayo's home, she was told that her stepmother was dying and needed to see her. Zara, confused as to what was happening, arrived at her stepmother's hut and realized that her stepmother was the one behind Ayo's sickness. She had heard of Ayo's encounter with Zara by the riverside and decided to make him extremely sick so that the entire village would point accusing fingers at Zara. Little did she know that her evil plan would lead to her own demise. She admitted that since her husband, who was Zara's father, died, she had been envious of the bond that Zara and her mother shared and decided to break it. The only way to achieve this was to make people believe that Zara was a witch and the one behind Ayo's illness. Her stepmother pleaded for forgiveness, and Zara wasted no time forgiving her. Zara tried to use her hair to save her stepmother's life, but noticed that her hair failed to glow. It was then that she heard a silent voice in her heart saying that her stepmother's heart was still filled with so much evil for her, and that until she purged herself of such evil, she would die. Zara pleaded with her stepmother to let go of the evil, but she refused and died in her wickedness. The entire village was shaken at the revelation as they apologized to Zara for how badly they had treated her. As the days went by, Prince Daniel found himself visiting Zara's village more often. With each visit, the bond between them blossomed like a tree in full bloom. One evening, as Zara and the prince decided to take a stroll to the village stream, the prince spoke to her, saying that since the day she walked into his life, she healed not only his curse, but his heart. The prince told Zara that he couldn't think of anyone else to walk beside him as he led his people, and asked if she would do him the honor of being his bride. Zara, filled with excitement, agreed to marry the prince as she loved him so dearly. That was how Zara, the girl born with dreadlocks, became a queen after suffering years of rejection and discrimination. This story teaches us that we should never judge or discriminate against others based on their differences or what we don't understand. Fear and ignorance often lead to injustice, but kindness, acceptance, and an open heart can uncover the beauty and power within others. True strength lies in embracing uniqueness, and even the most misunderstood can have a purpose beyond our imagination. Always choose kindness, for it can heal wounds, change lives, and even break curses. Thank you for watching our channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to see more inspiring and fascinating stories. Stay tuned for the next exciting video. We can't wait to share it with you. In the big, busy city of Lagos, there lived a young woman named Chinya. She worked as a bank teller, counting money all day, but Chinya wanted more. She dreamed of fancy clothes, big houses, and shiny cars. Every night she would look at fashion magazines and wish she could buy all the pretty things. The tiny apartment she shared with her younger sister felt even smaller as she flipped through the glossy pages, imagining herself in those glamorous outfits. Chinya had a friend named Chike. He was a teacher at a small school. Chike didn't have much money, but he had a big heart. He loved Chinya very much and wanted to marry her. Chike would bring Chinya small gifts like flowers or chocolates. He would take her on simple dates to the park or local restaurants, where they would sit on wooden benches under the shade of big trees, laughing about the little things in life. But Chinya wasn't sure about Chike. She liked him, but she worried about money. Chike is nice, she thought, but when will he ever be rich? I don't want to be poor all my life. So even though Chike was kind and loving, Chinya kept her heart closed. One day, Chinya went to the gym to exercise. As she was leaving, she saw something that made her stop and stare. A big, shiny black car pulled up in front of the gym. It was the kind of car Chinya had only seen in movies. The car door opened, and out stepped a tall, handsome man. He was wearing a suit that looked very expensive. This man was named Obina. He was a rich businessman who owned many companies. Obina saw Chinya looking at him and smiled. He walked right up to her. "Hello, beautiful lady," said Obina. "I'm new at this gym. Could you show me around?" Chinya felt her heart beat fast. She had never talked to such a rich and handsome man before. "Of course," she said, trying to sound calm. "I'd be happy to show you." Over the next few weeks, Obina and Chinya spent a lot of time together. Obina took Chinya to fancy restaurants she had never been to before. The tables were set with white tablecloths and sparkling silverware, and waiters in crisp uniforms served dishes with names she couldn't even pronounce. He bought her expensive clothes and jewelry. Chinya felt like she was living in a dream. She quickly forgot all about Chike and his simple gifts. After only 2 months of dating, Obina asked Chinya to marry him. He gave her a ring with the biggest diamond Chinya had ever seen. Chinya was so excited, she said yes right away. She didn't stop to think if she really knew Obina well enough to marry him. When Chinya told her parents about the engagement, they were overjoyed. Our daughter is marrying a rich man, they said happily. Now all our problems are over. They didn't ask Chinya if she really loved Obina. They only cared about his money. But not everyone was happy about the engagement. When Chaik heard the news, he was heartbroken. He came to Shinya's house to talk to her one last time. The small living room, with its faded cushions and peeling paint, felt heavier than ever as Chaik stood by the door, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. Please, Chinya, Chaik begged. Don't marry this man you barely know. I love you, and I promise I will work hard to give you a good life. It might not be a rich life, but it will be a happy one. For a moment, Chinya felt uncertain. She remembered all the good times she had with Chaik. But then she looked down at her big diamond ring. She thought about Obina's fancy car and big house. I'm sorry, Chaik, she said, but I've made my choice. I'm going to marry Obina. Chaik left with tears in his eyes. Chinya felt a little sad, but she told herself she was doing the right thing. I'll be rich, she thought. That's what's most important. The wedding day arrived. It was the biggest, fanciest wedding anyone in Lagos had ever seen. Chinya wore a beautiful white dress that cost more money than she used to make in a year at the bank. The venue was decorated with crystal chandeliers, cascading flower arrangements, and gold-trimmed chairs. Everyone was talking about how lucky she was to marry such a rich man. Chinya's parents couldn't stop smiling. They kept telling everyone how proud they were. Obina looked handsome in his expensive suit. When he put the gold wedding ring on Chinya's finger, Chinya felt like all her dreams had come true. But as soon as the wedding was over, things started to change. Obina took Chinya to his big mansion. Chinya was excited to see her new home, but when they went inside, she got a surprise. The house was big, but it felt cold and empty. There were no family photos on the walls, no colorful pillows on the couches. I didn't feel like a home at all, but that wasn't the biggest shock. Everywhere Chinya looked, she saw dogs, big dogs, small dogs, all kinds of dogs. There were at least 20 dogs running around the house. Their barking echoed through the marble hallways. Welcome home, my dear, said Obina. I hope you like dogs. They are very important to me. Chinya was confused. Obina had never said anything about liking dogs before, but she didn't want to seem ungrateful, so she tried to smile. Of course, she said. They're lovely. That night, Chinya got another big surprise. She thought she and Obina would sleep in the same room, like most married couples. But Obina went to sleep in a different room, and he took his favorite dog, a big Rottweiler, with him. Don't worry, Obina told Chinya when he saw her confused face. This is just how things are done in my family. The dogs are very special. You'll understand soon. Chinya didn't understand at all, but she was too afraid to ask questions. She went to her room alone, feeling very strange and lonely. Days passed and Chinya grew more and more unhappy. Obina spent all his time with the dogs. He hardly ever talked to Chinya except to tell her to feed the dogs or clean up after them. Chinya felt more like a servant than a wife. One day, about a week after the wedding, something happened that scared Chinya very much. She was walking past Obina's office when she heard him talking on the phone. Chinya didn't mean to listen, but she heard something that made her stop. Yes, the marriage is complete, Obina was saying. Now the dog's power will be even stronger. My wealth will double this year. Chinya felt like her blood turned to ice. She realized with horror that Obina had married her for some strange reason involving his dogs. She wasn't a wife to him at all. She was just part of some weird plan to make more money. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on her as she struggled to grasp the reality of her situation. Chinya ran to her room and cried. She felt stupid and ashamed. She had married a man she barely knew, all because she wanted to be rich. Now she was trapped in a big, cold house full of dogs with a husband who didn't love her at all. The once beautiful diamond ring on her finger now felt like a heavy chain, binding her to a life she no longer wanted. Chinya thought about calling her parents, but she was too embarrassed. They were so proud of her rich husband. How could she tell them the truth? And where would she go if she left? She had quit her job at the bank when she got married. She had no money of her own. Even the clothes she wore now were gifts from Obina, making her feel even more powerless. For days, Chinyere walked around the big house like a ghost. She fed the dogs and cleaned up after them, but her heart wasn't in it. She felt lost and alone. The sound of the dogs barking echoed through the empty hallways, amplifying her loneliness. She thought about Chika and wondered if he ever thought about her. Memories of his warm smile and the way he used to make her laugh began to haunt her. I made such a big mistake, she thought. But now it's too late. But there was one person in the house who was kind to Chinya. This was Zara, the maid. Zara had worked for Obina for many years. She could see how sad Chinya was. One day, while they were folding laundry together in the dimly lit laundry room, Zara decided to speak up. Madam, Zara said quietly, looking around to make sure no one could hear. I know you are not happy here. This is not a good place. The master, he does bad things with those dogs. You should leave before it's too late. Chinya was shocked. She hadn't realized Zara could see how unhappy she was. And what did Zara mean about Obina doing bad things with the dogs? But Chinya was too afraid to ask. But how can I leave? Chinya whispered back. I have nowhere to go, and Obina will never let me leave. He'll be so angry. Zara patted Chinya's hand gently. Don't worry, she said. I will help you. But first, you must pray. Ask God for forgiveness for marrying for money. Ask for strength to do the right thing. Then we will make a plan. Chinya nodded, feeling a small spark of hope for the first time in weeks. That night, she knelt by her bed and prayed harder than she ever had before. God, please forgive me, she whispered. I was foolish and greedy. Please give me the strength to fix my mistake. As the days passed, Chinya kept praying every night. She started to feel a little stronger. She began to think that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way out of this bad situation. One afternoon, about a month after Chinya's wedding, Zara came to her with excitement in her eyes. They were in the kitchen, pretending to sort vegetables when Zara whispered the plan. Madam, she said, I have good news. The master will be away at a big business dinner tomorrow night. That's our chance. I will call a taxi for you. Pack only what you need, some clothes, and any money you have. I'll leave the back door unlocked. As soon as it gets dark, you must run and not look back. Chinya felt scared but also relieved. This was her chance to escape. She hugged Zara tightly. Thank you, she whispered. I'll never